Welcome everyone to the final installment of our precious metals work group. Let's see, October 9th, holy smokes. And welcome everybody who has joined us online. Thank you. Hopefully you have received the material and have access to the material, including the agenda and some of the documents that were emailed out how long ago?
45 minutes ago.
About 45 minutes ago, so you can check your email if you need to for that content. The first, I think we'll just jump in on the first item, which is minutes from our last meeting. Any discussions on those or?
I'll make a motion to approve and say how amazed I am at Brittany doing long form and short form minutes. That's amazing. So I'll make a motion.
Well, I don't think we necessarily need to take a motion.
I don't know that we need to
Yeah.
formally approve them, but if anybody has feedback.
Given that it was
changes.
Representative Ivory who put forward the motion, I will say that they've been approved.
Yeah, that's just the
Unless anybody else has any other
that's just the
discussion items on that. All right,
Good.
great. And if you have any input on that, feel free to submit that along with some of these discussion items that we're going to cover now briefly. First, I want to skip over item number 3 and go to item number 4 on the agenda, the precious metals study report that is due from this study group. So thanks to Brittany for putting together this initial draft. You should have received that draft about 45 minutes ago. What we're looking for is input from the committee by the end of day tomorrow. I know that's not a lot of time. We've been told that the report is due on Friday from the committee, and we will be presenting to the interim committee next week, the revenue and tax interim committee of the legislature next week. And so they want the report on Friday. So we're asking for your input by the end of day tomorrow. Things such as maybe there's things that you don't agree with in the report. We certainly want to know that. If there are if there's better wording or clarification that you think would be helpful, we would certainly welcome that. And so Brittany has sent out or will be sending out a Word version so that you can track changes with any suggested edits, and we very much look forward to your input, because basically the working group members, your names will be attached to this, and so we want you to feel comfortable with your name on there, and to the extent that you would like input on that, we welcome it. So any questions on that?
Note that the legislative recommendation section is blank until after our discussion today. So I'll take the feedback from our discussion today and then add in that section.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so that gets us to item number 3, where we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting today, and that's on discussing the potential legislative recommendations. So you should have received a 2-page potential precious metals bill for 2025. So I just want to briefly go over these. Bill number 1 is really a cleanup bill from the prior session, and that language is pretty straightforward. It really just will allow us to account for costs and expenses, and this has to do with acquiring gold for the rainy day fund. So it's really not it's not relevant necessarily for our purposes here. It's really bill number 2 is the focus for the committee on this alternative gold-backed electronic payment system. Just briefly, bills number 3 and 4, we haven't discussed these items, but these are things that have come up in the course of going through this exercise. So we're not necessarily expecting any committee approval or formal support for these, but if you're interested in learning more or discussing any of these items, Representative Ivory has taken the lead on these, and And I assume you'd be happy to discuss with those.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I thought we talked about number 3 somewhat, but anyway, I mean, I'm happy to walk through these and talk about how they came about and what we're looking at. You want me to?
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, I think we're gonna really want to focus on this number 2 for
Yeah,
right now. And then
so,
to the extent we've got a little more.
Yeah, so
left
first of
over.
all, I mean, I know many of the committee members were able to go to the Brinks vault facility and see that, and we've had some other offsite opportunities. I think it was interesting that the amount of gold that we're talking about for the state, that rainy day investment, is basically like a school locker. It's like a 2x2, and that's, you know, it was really interesting to see the Brinks facility.
And it gets
things.
smaller every day.
Yeah, right. It gets smaller every day. Exactly right. It does. Yeah, I think when we started the
Don't remind me.
when we started the working groups, we were 2,200, and now we're north of 2,600 an ounce, and it's in a crazy trajectory. But so part of the work here, I've had some discussions with the speaker, and in fact, I was with him again this morning, and I think his preface to this, I think, is really instructive. Given that we're seeing things that we've not really ever seen before, kind of that same grimace that you've had, right? His statement was, how much better to have and not need any of these than to need them and not have them. And so that was kind of his his thought and preface as I walked him through the kind of the things that are in the outline and working through that. So I think on number 1, as Marlo mentioned, that's just a cleanup that, given the sausage making in the process, didn't get in there, and I think we can get that, you know, hopefully front loaded at the beginning of the session. I would suggest, and I'll talk to the chairs of the Red Tax Committee, that we see if we can't get that as a committee bill file. And the purpose of a committee bill file, that would be right at the front of the session. If it passes the committee unanimously, that would get through the process very quickly, and so we'd have that one done. I think bill number 1 really fits that bill. And so then number 2, we spent.
So Ken, Sophie, I think you might have had some things you wanted to add to the cleanup bill as well. I don't know if we've discussed all of those things, but in addition to kind of the management of expenses, I think there might be some other things to kind of size what was done last year. That
if that's right, let's get together between now and next week, and I'd like, if we could, so that I can get with the House and Senate chair of Red Tax, and if we can get them to do that as a committee file.
Do you have draft language?
Yeah, I mean, it's right now, it's pretty simple. Scott, I don't know if we've got.
If it's something you can share, I can add
Yeah.
my thoughts to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the clarifying that the costs and expenses of purchases,
Mhm.
that the treasurer's office can recover those.
Okay.
And it's kind of a, you would think that would be a given, but in state code and language, we need to specify that clearly, so.
Okay,
And that didn't happen in the original bill.
okay. We had some other suggestions we might add to it, so you, hopefully I can
Yeah.
provide those after.
Yeah, and let's talk about those. I mean, where that is really a clerical, technical cleanup. I mean, we can look, but let's talk about what it is. If it's anything that might slow, you know, that kind of cleanup in, we could put it in any of the other bills potentially. So, but let's just talk about it.
Okay, I just want to be careful because I can't suggest that we would endorse anything either until we see the language and, you know, work as it is.
Well, Scott, do you want in that regard, on the cleanup, do you wanna, do we have any?
It was actually an amendment last year that just didn't get adopted. All that it's really doing is saying, so what the concern is that the treasurer's office can't recover their administrative costs because this is a little bit different of an asset, but what we need to put in there is basically that they have the authority to recover their costs. It's just like a couple of lines. Like I say, it was an amendment. I'll pull it up. Yeah, running out of battery, so it's trying to not do this.
And I have that as well. If there's no changes to the amendment that was proposed last year.
Yeah, if you have it, you can put it up, that'd be great.
Okay, and I may just add, like, there's a couple other parameters that we discussed with the treasurer's office that would be nice to include in that.
Yeah, and so,
So I just want to be careful of us, suggesting we support it until we actually see it.
yeah, where this is non-substantive for the cleanup bill, and my preference would be, let's get that through so that it's done, and then if we've got substantive things, we could either do a standalone or put it in any of these other three.
So the specific language would read, state treasurer may deduct any administrative costs incurred in investing in precious metals under subsection 2A. This is in 15.7. Including delivery and vaulting costs from interest generated by the investments in precious metals before depositing interest in the general. So really all it's doing is just giving an authorization to the treasurer's office to include their administrative costs in to deduct the administrative cost of the investments in the interest it's generated in the investment.
Yeah, and I don't want to, pull away time from what we need to discuss today, but there's some other things that I think might be helpful too, to add clarity and transparency. For example, is all of that intended to be invested all at once, or is that going to be over time in certain tranches to test it out and,
Yeah.
and also there's some components where there's two buckets of there's 4 buckets right now of rainy day funds. It'd be great to leave 2 alone so that those can easily be accessed if needed right away. While this is,
And I think that was the cleanup, the additional
Yeah.
cleanup language that Sophia
Yeah.
wanted to
yeah,
add is to
there's
kind of
there's
limit
other
it to
things
the.
that weren't
the
mentioned
2
here,
rainy day
so
funds.
that I think would be important to consider discussing.
Yeah,
here. That would be great to be captured in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of for disclosure, we've got others that are here. We've had discussions with Speaker's office, Senate President's office, your office on how to actually do the purchase from the bill that already passed. And to tranche that out, and we've kind of talked about that and worked with the different offices, and I think we're at a place where everyone was.
I don't know that we
know that we
necessarily
are.
need to legislate anything there in terms of the timing, do we? I don't know that you'd want to legislate the timing.
Not necessarily, but just with there not being any parameters, I think that is something that we want to talk through.
Yeah, and I think when we went to Brinks, right,
Yeah.
you were gonna get a memo to Sophia's office, and we were gonna send that to the speaker and the president, just to make sure everybody
Yeah, and I
was.
have that.
I haven't
ready.
seen that
I
yet.
haven't sent it.
So, yeah, I mean, I think just from what we talked about, I think we still go on that basis, right? That, and that's, and again, for everybody to kind of, for
Sure.
clarity, for everybody that hasn't been in those meetings. The discussion with Speaker's office, Senate President, and with your office was to do was it 5 million or $10 million tranches over time to go over 6 months to purchase in, but again, that's the implementation of the other bill, and that's.
Yeah, that's
basically what we're
part of
talking
it,
about,
but just knowing that this is completely exempt from the Money Management Act, this bucket of funds.
Yeah,
I think it's important to also, have something in there. Talks about best execution or just, something that we can, or talk through if that's gonna be in rules, but I just.
yeah,
With not seeing anything on paper, I have nothing really to comment on other than what I'm seeing here. It'd be great to have some additional guardrails in place that we can look at.
yeah, and I think in any of the substantive bills. I mean, anything that we need to look at that, let's, absolutely, let's look at that if we need to get those in.
Well, if you're talking about amendments, that might be fine, but I would actually resist putting anything in other bills just because we don't know if we can support other bills holistically until we see what's in them too. So if it's a
Yeah.
cleanup bill for this investment piece, it'd be great to address the investment side in this bill, because all along, HB 348 did 2 things. It enabled the treasurer to do that investment of the rainy day funds. And then there's other components that would be part of this study. So just so they don't get mixed up, we want to be able to support the mechanism that would enable the state to do that investment piece successfully.
Yeah, well, yeah, so. And kind of like we were talking about, there was an amendment that was already there that just didn't pass through the session.
Yeah, and I'm just suggesting that it would be nice maybe to see if there's other things we can put in there, whether that be through administrative rules.
Yeah,
or
and
something
I'll
else.
commit to you that let's look at it and look at your language. And if that's
Okay,
a separate bill, if it's in one of the other bills or whatever, let's look at that. And I'm happy to consider that. I would really prefer on this really little technical piece. I'd like to have that just in and through and done the
Sure.
first
Well,
week of the
that's-
session.
I want to be able to help support that as well.
Yeah.
I might not be able to do that unless we see some of those guardrails in place. And if they're, you know, if it's addressed in code, fine. If it's addressed in other ways, that's fine as well. But
Yeah.
again, I just, without seeing anything, I just
Well,
expressed.
yeah, so couple pieces, right? On the implementation. I understand that there's supposed to be a memo from what we talked about at Brinks and with the others that's.
Yeah, I just haven't seen anything yet, so that's.
Right,
That's.
I haven't either, so,
Yeah,
so,
but if
I,
we can work together on that.
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem there, right?
Yeah.
As far as the cleanup, that's just a very, very narrow piece that just didn't get in the legislation last year. Right, that's completely non-substantive to anything that was done, so. Whatever your concerns are, I'm happy to talk about them, and however we need to do that, I'm happy to see what we need to do to get that in.
Okay, well, I'll take a look.
Yeah, and then do you, Brittany, if you have that, I mean, it's really just what Scott said, right?
Ken, could I
I'm
just
verifying.
Yes.
This is
a quick question,
what
just to make sure I
you're
understand. So, I had a good chance to talk with Kurt and Marlo a month or so ago in a little bit more detail on this. And what I learned in that process was that the rainy day fund extends a little longer than a short period of time, which is fortunate. You have there's not an immediate need for cash generally from the rainy day fund. And so this is really, we're really not talking about using gold as a hedge against the deterioration of the dollar. We're not trying to hedge that exposure because there's reasons why it might not be a good hedge for dollar denominated liabilities that we have, since we take in dollar denominated revenue all the time. Having said that, there's, I think, a pretty good argument to be made that an investment in gold historically has improved overall returns on portfolios, particularly when held for longer periods of time. And I know what you're talking about right now is this rainy day fund and what component of that actually gets put into this. But it also could get a little confused if we try to be clear that I think there'd be a number of people who have sophistication in this area that would struggle with the idea of using gold as a hedge against a dollar denominated liability in the short term.
Yeah.
There's administrative costs of
Sure.
having gold. There's,
Yeah,
it doesn't earn a return. There's lots of reasons not to do that.
right,
There's an equal number of very good reasons to do this potentially over the longer haul, which would be supported by a lot of information. And so I don't know if that has anything to do with what you two are talking about. Obviously, I know nothing about this legislative process and how it works,
yeah,
but I just don't want to do anything that potentially limits the conclusions of the committee by something that might happen in the construct of how it's actually done. So.
yeah, and so. Again, the only thing that this, what we're talking about here is bill number 1.
And I don't think we're looking for committee support on bill number 1, right? I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean, it does, I don't know that it's
I don't know that
necessary,
we
right?
need-
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
we
right.
don't need the committee to weigh
Right.
in one way or another on the cleanup. bill.
Right, I mean, it's just purely a cleanup, right? It's
Yeah.
purely cleanup language that just cleans up the expenses of the purchases can be covered by the treasurer's office, which has been the intention, but that's all that is. So I think anything else that is substantive can go into any of these other bills or a standalone bill. And Sophia, to that point, like I said, if the things that we've talked about on the takedown schedule, the memos and having, the different offices, sign off on that. If that's not sufficient and there's something else that you feel like needs to go into legislation, I'm wide open,
Yeah,
right?
no,
So,
I think the things I'm describing could easily be part of number one in a technical bill.
well, help me understand that, because help me understand, well, just help me understand what you're hoping to see there then.
Just some clarity around the process so that it's understood how that will work.
Yeah,
There's part two buckets of the rainy day funds that would be, I think, really important for us to be able to access and deploy if something were to happen.
yeah,
And so, you know, you could still preserve that 10%, but hold the other two harmless and take
Yeah.
it from other buckets. There's also questions on whether or not the interest that's either accrued with that 10% or lost, that actually hits outside of the rainy day funds. It goes into the general fund. So we need some clarity on that as well. So just
Are you-
technical stuff that
Sorry,
would,
I'm sending it to you right now.
that would,
oh, I just mean, are you
Clarify
catching
for-
those from what she's saying?
Oh, yes, sorry.
or even the Division of Finance
Yeah.
to be able to do their ACFR. So just
Yeah.
things like that,
Yeah,
that
and-
I think that are technical in nature, but provide some guidance on that.
Yeah, it. Happy to do that and look at that and talk about having that in. In my mind, what we're talking about with bill number one is just super hyper technical clerical cleanup. And that's kind of preventing implementing what's already been passed. But I'm perfectly happy to, I would feel better having that either in any of these other bills or in a standalone. So that we can get that really, really super simple piece just in and through and done. You know, like as a, you know, no substance, no, you know, it's not which funds, it's not how much, it's just. All it is they can recover costs of the investment, period.
Well, I'd just be concerned if something happened to the other two bills, that what's needed wouldn't get done and then.
Yeah. Well,
that would be
here,
taken in the
let me
code.
see if this helps you. I would be willing to say, and I mean, let me get the language that you would like to see. And then let me talk to the chairs of Rev Tax. And if they're okay with that, as, you know, if they think that's easy enough as a committee bill file with all of that together,
Okay,
then I'm totally fine with that.
okay.
If they
great.
think it
Yeah,
slows down and it's substantive, then I'd
Sure.
probably prefer that we just
Yeah, I understand.
get that cleanup piece in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand your goal is to get it to be a committee bill that can just go through as a cleanup.
Yeah, I mean, my goal is it's a one sentence thing that we just missed last time, that I just want to get it done as fast as possible. And as easy as possible. And so if there's any substantive snags, then I'd rather put that somewhere else. But let's meet after, if you're okay. And then if you want to get whatever the language is that you'd like. And then let me talk to the Rev Tax chairs and the committee members. And then maybe we could, you know, huddle with them together or whatever, but I think I understand what you're getting at. I don't think it's an issue or a problem. What we're talking about with this bill number one is really a one sentence, hyper technical, you know. Clean up, nobody's would have any questions about it. It's kind of a no duh that it didn't get in. And I just don't want to slow that down at all. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, so let's just. If you would get that language to me and then, you know, let me chat with them. Chances are they don't care and it's easy enough. We just do it, right?
Okay, well, and if not, maybe you need another bill. that
Yeah,
has
right.
that Investment.
Yeah, and so if it's a second bill, then we just do that.
I
Or like I
would
said,
hate to see it get tagged into other bills that.
yeah,
We
yeah.
may or may not be able to support.
Yeah, and either way, right? So whatever, if it could, first of all, if it could fit in bill number one and they're okay with it, then great, let's just do that.
Okay.
If there's any snags, then we could either put it as a standalone or in one of the others, and whatever you feel comfortable with on that.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so bill number two?
Okay.
All right. Bill number two then, so this is really getting at the idea that, you know, that resolution that the US Senate put out in March, that they're talking about concerns about China and Europe undermining the dollar as a payment system, the BRICS meeting in a couple of weeks and, rumbling about the dollar as a payment system. And this is where the speaker really came out and said, wow, we'd much rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And so the idea is an electronic gold-backed payment system. And this is where we've had, different meetings here, and we've heard from things like there's the Glint, and there were some other things out there where there are companies that have developed payment systems that are electronic and gold-backed. Couple of things that would do. I mean, first of all, it would be an RFP. And so the bill in that sense is pretty simple. It would just have the treasurer's office put out an RFP on qualifications for that type of a system. I think from some of the things that we've seen and heard, some of the system requirements we talked about, looking down in number 3 would be certainly anything like that would be vaulted in Utah, like we saw at Brinks. Parameters for redemption. If you had a gold-backed electronic payment system, how do you get it back into either Federal Reserve notes or redeem it out in physical gold or some other format? There'd have to be some provision for that. Technology code, operation systems, escrow, and then, other type of criteria that would be put into an RFP, and then that would be put out to look at who may be providers for systems like that. And that's really the basic nature of the bill. And so the idea is in any kind of a contingency, and where we're in kind of a topsy-turvy world where people are actually talking about the continuity of the dollar as a world payment system, that kind of going back on what the speaker said, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And so that's kind of pretty basic on what bill number 2 is. Is there any questions on that?
I have a question on just item 7 under your outline.
Yeah.
I pay for payment of state employee salaries. Does that need to be part of this?
I mean, it's just study, right?
Yeah, I just would. I think there's a lot there that I would be worried about on that, just knowing that a lot of the state employees we have
But
qualify for state aid.
Right. So if we're looking at a payment, so the idea is we've got some potential disruption in the dollar as a payment system. And we're looking at having contingency plans as a payment system. And then what 7 is saying is that we just study what that looks like in payment of employees, payment of vendors, which would be kind of the reason for going down that road in the first place, right?
Does anybody else have any thoughts on that, or?
You're talking about state employees specifically?
Uh-huh.
I don't have it on that. I do wonder, is there anybody who actually meets the criteria of being able to have a transaction system and also have a storage of gold in the state of Utah?
Not currently, and so that would be in order to do that, or not that I'm aware of, right? But in order to do that, we've heard from a couple here that they would have to be committed to do that, right?
And it's probably easier to find somebody who could do a store of gold than somebody who could put a transaction system together in a reasonably short period of time.
Yeah, help me understand what.
So the ability to actually transact on a card, for example.
Yeah.
With the rails associated with that, and the ability to do the transaction instantaneously to adjudicate.
That's more difficult than the store.
That's more
exactly
difficult than the store.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
So that's the only thing I would just think about is are we trying to solve for a set of one that potentially could do this, and just making sure that we're really comfortable that if that's what it is, that it's really got everything that we think it needs to have.
Yeah, and that's where, and that's a great point, Gary, actually. So that's where in the RFP, we'd want to capture as many of those critical elements.
Yeah.
And then, you know, assuming the bill passed, then Marlo's office and anyone else advising him would really get down into the weeds as to what those are. And so, kind of working with Scott, what are the big elements that we need to capture? And that's where kind of that short list of, you know, vaulted, insured, redeem, you know, some of those things. But if there's others, then, and where are we on, do we have any draft language, or are we close to that on
Yeah, so
that?
this one I have draft language, I'm just working on putting the information we had in that meeting on Monday.
Okay,
But after that, so probably by, if not this afternoon, tomorrow morning, we can get something else.
so then, yeah, and so that, what I'd hope is to get that out to everyone and then make sure we get those, you know, kind of, how would you describe, I mean, the kind of mission critical elements that, you know, the RFP must contain these. And then, you know, the treasurer, the RFP may contain whatever else
And even maybe get somebody from a US or a Utah domiciled financial institution to actually weigh in a little bit on those things. That's a specific level of detail that somebody who's really in the card industry would need to bring.
Yeah, and we were hoping our banking association person would be here, but yeah, absolutely, we wanna get that input, and you, I guess I don't want to assume, I know Sophia was in the legislature with us, so I know she knows the legislative process, and Brian's here all the time, but you know, obviously, we start something out and, you know, we've got time to make changes and put things in and obviously we want to get this right, because the hope and what 348 said is we think there's an opportunity that we can plant a flag and kind of lead out in, you know, what's a pretty kind of novel fintech area. So we want to get it right.
What kind of risk is there with the state backing a system like this? If somebody's out there buying gold and suddenly gold tanks, right? I'm just wondering, how do we protect ourselves from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like the future performance is not indicative, or past performance is not indicative of future results, right? But you've got that with anything in the world. And I think if Kevin Freeman were here, or some of the World Gold Council people would probably say that it's been, you know, it's been the most stable payment system since Moses, but yeah, I don't know.
I think the argument, or one argument I would make is just, if you go back over 150 years, if you added in a portion of your portfolio, say 5% or 10%, something like that on balance, your portfolio would have performed slightly better than it would have performed had that not been in, depending obviously on what the constellation was of other things you're investing in. And I think that gives you a lot of safety that we're not doing something that is, or that the state's not contemplating doing something that doesn't make sense. Where I do think you potentially get into trouble is where you say, I'm going to use this in the very short term for a rainy day fund, sort of the opposite of what we've been talking about, right? We don't want to use this day after tomorrow, because if you're really doing it day after tomorrow, it's probably not the right thing,
Right.
because it needs to perform over a period of time to do the function that we want it to do. Because it really isn't a very good hedge for the dollar, right? Because what will happen is, you know, if the dollar declines, then revenues will actually go up in dollars, right? And so a dollar is a pretty good hedge for a dollar, but gold is a reasonable hedge for a portfolio.
I'm thinking particularly in the case of citizens of the state of Utah. Right, here we have a transaction-based system.
Yeah.
And we appear to be promoting this, and suddenly there's volatility in gold, right? And they say, what are you doing, state of Utah? You told me to, you know, you put your seal of approval on this, and suddenly I'm, you know, underwater, right? I mean, how do we protect ourselves against that kind of risk with the everyday citizen in Utah when there's the potential for?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
Can I comment on this before I have to
Yes.
go to the airport? With freedom, there's always risk, period. And with liberty and freedom, the best answer is education. and you just have to make it clear. People have been buying gold for thousands of years. People buy Bitcoin, it goes up and down. You just make it clear that this is a consumer choice, that we're creating freedom and opportunity from a state system. We've got 30 states that we're talking to about this. And that's the key, is that people need to know nobody's guaranteeing anything. And the state is just creating an extra liberty opportunity for you that happened to be put in the Constitution by the founders. It is not no one without consulting or thinking or praying or whatever should put everything they own into gold. That wouldn't be true. You wouldn't want to do that. But then you don't want to keep everything you own in cash either. So the notion is that you would be expanding liberty, and the best answer to that is education and disclosure. I've got a chartered financial analyst background. That's the proper answer. And we're not talking about something that disappears and could potentially go to zero. This isn't a penny stock. It does have volatility. There's no question, less volatility than Bitcoin. But the dollar has volatility too. The purchasing power of the dollar ranges all the time relative to gasoline. In fact, every day you can go to the gas station and see a different price per gallon. So I think the best answer is education and disclosure, and let Utahns know, hey, we're leading in freedom, and something that's being looked at around the world. Central banks are putting large amounts of their reserves into gold. They're not holding as much in dollars these days. There's a independent institute just put out a book on the gold standard that I'm going to read on the plane. But I do think that the right answer is you offer your citizens as much freedom as possible and choice, and then you disclose the truth and you educate. So I think it's a very proper thing for a state to do, and I think our founders believe that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the constitutional provision of where they started, but the way I would answer that, Marlo, is the IMF in May signaled that the rules-based monetary order is changing. And there are signals that later this month, the BRICS meeting in Kazan, in fact, I think I sent it to you before the meeting, that can't remember what the.
And I guess my point is do we need anything in legislation that discusses any of that? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the RFP, right? And from a policy standpoint.
Well, I'm thinking on the implementation side, when people find out there's this system available, we've white labeled it, the state of Utah gold, whatever. We're going to need some ability to educate people and protect the state from just these disclosures and that would be required.
It's just disclosure, because we could have something that.
Yeah, I mean, I
disclosure when they download.
Yeah, I mean, you think about securities laws, right? How many laws are related to securities industry? I just think we want to be careful about how this is rolled out to the citizens of the state that may not be sophisticated and may take a bath for a temporary period.
Maybe I could jump in a little bit as well. I think the point on education is absolutely critical. I think Bill 1 and how it's been articulated in terms of your rainy day funds being an optimal addition to your portfolio is exceptional in terms of an understanding. The case can be made very clean and clear. I think what could be challenging around Section 2 or Bill 2 as it's proposed, at least as I read it, and look, I've been trying to catch up as quickly as I can with the content coming through, is drawing a direct link to a challenge around the payment system and a study on paying people in gold, when today there is still a large component of their portfolio and their lives that's still dollar denominated, liabilities in particular. And I guess my question would be, there was some talk about education and a glide path to kind of bringing more systems and services and opportunities to people. So I'd almost ask if item B on the study would come before item A, and if there were additional study opportunities, including corporates and maybe some element of people's payments that could be considered as opposed to full-on salaries, because it kind of looks like it jumped all the way to paying people fully in gold. And I think that was kind of something that I thought maybe was going to happen over time. Because I
Yeah,
think
let
there is
me-
a lot of education that needs to take place to make sure that people understand what's
Can
going on
I-
with
can
an
I-
asset that's different to their liability base.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jay,
well,
oh, sorry.
let me just
Yeah.
set the assumptions, right? Let's make sure we're not confusing and conflating, right? So we've talked about investment in gold. And that's a separate discussion. So we're not, in talking about what we're talking about with bill number 2 is the US Senate, BRICS, IMF, others have talked about there may be contingencies with the dollar as a payment system. And so what bill 2 is about is really just a contingency. That whereas the US Senate and the BRICS and the IMF and others are exploring and looking at evolutions, changes, contingencies in the dollar as a payment system, this would be looking at this type of a system as a contingency payment system in the state of Utah. And again, kind of going to the speaker's statement, better to have it not need it than need it not have it, when there's credible, substantial buzz about payment systems are changing in the world. And so just want to make sure we set the assumptions on what this is and what it isn't specifically.
Yeah, and just before I get to you, Jason, just the idea here is that we would have a payment system that individual citizens could participate in with their own money. So basically converting dollars to gold that they could then transact with in the economy. That's what we're talking, that's what I'm.
That's right.
referring to,
And that is opt-in, right?
Yes.
Completely voluntary,
Completely
but if there's
voluntary,
contingency.
but it has the backing of the state. Because we are offering it through the state. So, Mr. Cousins.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to point out that actually, I don't think you have to be too worried about what kind of safeguards and things you need to put in place, because they already exist. This is something I've been trying to explain to committee meetings, treasurers and legislators across the country, is that actually there's a very well-established infrastructure around regulation and consumer protection around financial services and payments that involve things like, ensuring that anybody doing this type of thing have to be open, fair, and not misleading. That includes informing people, for instance, in advertising such a product that, the value, whilst the value of gold goes up and down and generally up, it can go down, and therefore, all those kinds of warnings need to be in place. That's all very heavily monitored and legislated and regulated. As an example, there's all kinds of policies that have to be put in place around vulnerable customers, et cetera, et cetera. The list is massive. The regulatory compliance requirements are huge, but I don't think you need to double down on that. That's already in place. The second thing is that, just affirming really what you've been saying around why do this. Nicholas Silich, who I think some of you listened to a little while ago, he was the former chief risk officer of Bank of New York Mellon, and then the former chief risk officer of Prudential Financial. He's spent most of his life and a huge amount of resources trying to look into the future as an insurance company and trying to work out what's important for them. And, he said, yes, gold is going to be the volatile out of the two. The US dollar, as you say, Gary, if you're making payments denominated in US dollars, then gold's always going to be the volatile one until it isn't. And really, that's his point as well, which is similar to what your speaker was saying, is that it's prudent to have the choice of a solution. Should one day it be required, it's already up and running and being used.
But
Yeah,
if I could,
And
I
that
can't
can-
figure out how to raise a hand on this thing. I pushed every single button on the screen, but it doesn't work. So
You're good. Thank you. Go ahead.
But I think part of the answer might be, so I'm very supportive of getting RFPs for a system like this and exploring it in a study. On libertarian grounds, people should be free. But if the state, as part of setting this up, says because because the dollar is being challenged around the world and the value of the dollar is plummeting, then people would say, oh, well, we've got to do this. And I think it should be completely optional. There is no realistic risk that the dollar stops being the world's reserve currency in the lifetimes of anybody on this call. But people should be free to use gold if they want to. If they're more speculative, I'm 100% in favor of that. But if, as part of the legislation, we say we're doing this because the dollar is going to hell in a handbasket, then you're going to have a lot of people who will then say, oh, then I want to go into gold. And then when gold shifts in value, they'll say, you misled me. And we just shouldn't do that. We should just simply establish this on the grounds of we're providing options for our citizens, as opposed to we're preparing for the end of the United States as the global reserve currency.
Yeah, Randy, I'm totally on board with that. I'd be really curious because you're tied into this world much more than I would be. What did you make of when the Senate said that China and Europe are taking actions to undermine the dollar as a payment system, and the IMF talking about the rules-based order and payment systems are changing? I'd be curious your thoughts on that, and then I totally agree that this would be something opt-in optional, whether for citizens or the state or agencies, whatever. I'd be curious your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, I mean, China obviously would like to replace the dollar. The BRICS would like to replace the dollar. There is zero possibility of that being a serious threat to the dollar in our lifetimes. Over the course of a long time, the pound lost its status, and the dollar could conceivably lose its status. But again, not in our lifetimes. What's the option for the issue with the role of the dollar in the global payment system and as a global reserve currency, which are two slightly different things, obviously, is the old story of the campers and the bear. You don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the other camper. And there is no other camper on the planet that is superior to the dollar. Do people really want to own a renminbi instead of a dollar? Do they really want to own a euro instead of the dollar? Some of you have heard that story, but without going into the reasons for it, the Gulf nations 20 years ago were making noise that they were going to stop buying U.S. Treasury securities. So at that time, I had my Treasury hat on, and I went and circled around the Gulf and talked to all the finance ministers and the central bank governors. The loudest was the central bank governor of Abu Dhabi, who had been saying, we absolutely are going to stop buying dollars. And so I met with him, and he had press on the steps of the central bank. I repeated again, we're stopping buying dollars. And so then I walk in and I say, Governor, I'm very sorry for the provocation that had resulted in this. It wasn't the government's fault. And he said, oh, don't worry. I just have to say that for public consumption. Of course, we're going to continue to use the dollar. What's our option? I could buy euros, I suppose, and then what? Invest them in Italy? It's just not an option. So again, none of that says that we should not be eagerly pursuing this, but we shouldn't raise concerns on the part of the populace that about the standard payment system, and that they really need to be prepared and they need to be shifting to gold. They should shift to gold if they want, and we should facilitate that. That's a forward-thinking state.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, kind of much like Bitcoin and whatever else, right?
Absolutely.
And having it be optional and facilitated, and as protecting residents of the state, we prefer that it be vaulted. We prefer that it be audited and insured and all those kinds of things. And that's really what this is getting at.
Doesn't that say that, I've just looked briefly at this little study report, but the study report basically makes the argument that Randy was just saying we ought not to make, which is the world is falling apart, we've got to really do something, as opposed to saying a prudent investment over time has proven to be to have a portion of your portfolio allocated to gold, the state is taking actions to do something that is prudent. And it gets away from this idea that, oh, the dollar is going to fall apart, the world is coming to an end. It really just says, this has been historically been prudent. We anticipate it'll be prudent in the future. We're setting up a capability to be able to do this as a state. Others now have the opportunity to do so without paying capital gains taxes
Yeah.
by transacting. It's a fairly simple proposition
Yeah.
when done the way Randy just described it.
Mhm.
You know, I agree with that completely. I'm curious, you know, this was, I don't know if that was the exact chart that Luke Groman showed us in what was, I think, the first meeting, but you know, that just from a data standpoint, I mean, the central bank kind of massive departure from dollars and into gold, that what does that portend for you as you just, I mean, what does that portend as you look at something like that?
Well, if it could be sustained for a very long period of time, it would impact the value of the dollar.
Yeah.
But if you look at the way things are right now, the dollar has not deteriorated significantly, you know, for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And it's possible that it could continue to deteriorate if there's overspending. But there's overspending in almost all developed countries and also overspending in China today.
Right, right.
And so we're not alone in not being frugal with the way we manage things. And my view is that without getting out on a limb, we can do the things that I think are good for citizens. This is something that will be good for people.
Yeah.
When I met with Jason, I thought to myself personally, this is the first time I've ever really considered buying gold because Jason has a way to do this that's really pretty easy to do.
Mhm.
And it's not wacky or anything like that. It's
Right.
just a good, simple process. And so anyway, that's sort of how I think about it. And it gets away from this whole idea of is
Sky's
gold a hedge
falling.
for the dollar, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
all kinds of people who can argue against that we don't want to have in the tent, but it's very easy and justifiable to say that this is a reasonable investment and the state is making a reasonable investment. And if you want to, go knock yourself out. You can.
Right, and reasonable as a payment system when done, and
Yeah.
I just keep going back to this is my little Glint account.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I started buying it, you know, back at the lower left corner, right? And I'm like, that's pretty great with that, you know? So may I ask both of you then, again, as a contingency and as an option, how would you frame that in the
So the
report where we're saying, you know,
contingency
money's on the move and money's changing, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's, you know, there are movements like this and other movements, and again, to the speaker's point, rather have it not need it. How would you frame that?
So the way I think about it is the state has dollar denominated revenues and dollar denominated liabilities. So those are not going to get out of whack, right? Property taxes are going to go up, income taxes are going to go up if the dollar continues to deteriorate, right?
Yeah.
Because there'll be inflation that will cause that to happen. There's a whole separate question which says, how should the state invest its resources? And it's a very reasonable thing to say that some portion of the state's resources should be invested in precious metals of some sort. So that's how I think about it. And over time we may change it. You may say Bitcoin 15 years from now is a better decision than gold. But for right now, if you go back historically, gold has provided a function that has been useful in a portfolio. And so I really like what Randy was saying about the idea that the ceiling's not falling here. I think we tend to get a whole bunch of people on the other side who would argue against this if we make that argument, but it's very sensible and defendable to say it's wise to have a portion of a portfolio.
Yeah. And so, and then I think you're making the case for bill number 3 that we'll talk about in just a second, but
sure.
So man, I honestly, you guys, I'm so grateful for this discussion. I mean, I think this is what I was really hoping that in this group, we'd have that kind of input and feedback. I'm personally very grateful. Other thoughts or comments on number 2, and then I'd like to kind of just do a flyover for 3 and 4, but other thoughts or questions or comments?
If I may briefly, Treasurer.
Please.
I just think while we have a legislative attorney who's a drafter here, potentially including language barring lawsuits against the state based on the performance of gold, right? And then follow that up with the necessary disclosures. I think that's
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of the RFP and consideration. I like that.
Are there other things that we need to consider in legislation? Like, relative to the transaction system, payment system?
Yeah, that's,
I just don't know.
yeah, I mean, and again, the big idea is an RFP to look at this kind of a payment system with the big areas that should be considered in the RFP. And then as it moves down the track, I mean, to Gary's point, you would assemble other experts together to make sure that that was the right contract in the specific RFP, but we want to make sure we get the big rocks, you know, like liability protection and vaulted and redeemed and insured and audited and, you know, get those kinds of things in. But if there are other concerns like that, and obviously we're talking about getting this out and getting feedback back in, but yeah, if there are other concerns like that, absolutely, let's get them in the RFP, and then others you would be able to catch in the specific RFP and in the specific agreement if anything were ever awarded. You know, the fact that an RFP goes out doesn't presuppose that anything has to be awarded.
So Ken, is this a payments system per se, or is it a transaction system? As I read this, I mean, it looks like you're given the ability to purchase gold, to sell it, to make payments with it, to transfer it, or is it just truly payments?
In number 2,
Yeah.
So the question, I don't know if people online could hear, but the question is this a payment system or a transaction?
I don't know if I understand the distinction.
Well, I just thought payments is you're making a payment to somebody as
Oh.
opposed to, now I also want to use the platform to buy something. I'm not
Oh.
paying something, I'm buying something, I'm storing it, I'm saving it, I'm transferring it to somebody.
I think it would necessarily need to be fully transactional.
Right.
Yeah,
Like you can't have just a payment system if you don't have the ability to purchase into that system, so.
yeah, so is it a semantic difference that you're talking about, payment versus transaction?
If payment includes that, I'm
Yeah.
fine with it.
Yeah.
Just
I
in my
think what
mind, I
happened-
think payment is, I owe somebody something, you know, I'm making a payment.
Yeah,
And to your point, Hugh, it should maybe say storage as well, since storage is provided.
I'm just wondering, you know,
yeah,
I don't know if it makes a difference legislatively or not, or like it's a monkey wrench, but.
yeah. Yeah, I'm
It just frames-
terminology.
Just frames it a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if, I mean, from a, I'm just trying to think. So go back electronic transaction system, payment system. I think they use that because that's what the Senate used,
Hmm.
right? I think I took that language right from that Senate resolution.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
dollar
but
as
I was
a-
listening to Randy
Yeah.
and Gary, you know, and I was imagining in my mind, somebody using the system, someone seeing that it's available in the
Yeah.
States. Has looked at it, and then now they're participating in it, and it's not them making payments. Or them receiving payments, but the payments means to transact with, you know, again, buy, purchase, store, transfer, hold.
I mean, it could be medium of exchange system. Or transaction system, I mean, I don't know semantically, there's a difference, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's why.
Payment system is generally understood to include using it to buy things, using it to transfer funds, but also using it to buy things. If that's what we'd be setting up, and that's what would be most useful.
We need a RFP committee.
I think that would be great. But that would be, yes, in fact, you would. Yes, Chris, or Scott, do you not typically specify who the RFP selection committee or the
Yeah, I mean, we probably,
RFP
right now,
creation?
it would be the treasurer's office, but we can certainly detail who should be selecting
Well, I think that kind of falls under our executive authority to consult with whoever we want within that framework. I mean, if there's anything that needs to be spelled out statutorily, you know, we would accommodate whatever you believe, but otherwise we'll, you know, we'll assemble the group of experts in evaluating that we need to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, clearly we could. I guess the question is, would we want to consider specifying who that should be, or do we just leave it to, I'm fine with it, that discretion, but
you're. Yeah, that would be up to you guys.
you know.
I'm wondering, just if we are going to be the one, you know, providing this medium. If there needs to be just some sort of regulatory framework around it too, that would provide for, you know, expectations to disclose or whatnot, or to, you know, whether or not the state's gonna back any losses, because gold is so volatile, for example, what are the expectations there, if there's losses, or if we're actually providing the service, it makes us be, if we're providing.
Every time you say volatile, I'm gonna put that up right there.
The idea wouldn't be for the state to actually provide the service, right? The state is gonna utilize the service.
Well, I thought we were contracting with third party providers to do the services.
Just for
Is
the
that
state,
right?
just for the state.
Yeah.
Well,
Not for individuals, right?
Well, that,
Right.
I assumed it was for individuals as well as the state.
Well,
Yeah.
I think what's contemplated would be a kind of instance of a platform that is labeled Utah Gold Dollars or something. So it carries some sort of cachet of being, having the state's blessing, right? On it, and then people can participate in as they want to, but the state is essentially almost putting their name on it as.
We're facilitating it, but we're not.
Facilitating it, right,
not-
well, it'd be called, you know. Utah Gold Dollars or something, I don't know.
I mean, we do have to be careful that we are not printing or coining money. That's what
Yeah.
we're in the Constitution doing that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an open question as to whether it's like Utah state sanctioned name necessarily, I don't. Yeah. I don't.
You're not sure that that's necessary? is
Yeah,
what
I
you're
don't know
saying?
if that's necessary. But to your point, and I'm thinking back of the lunch that we had at the Harmons, right, that day that where the talk is about, you know, payment systems and the continuity of payment systems. And if we ever needed to, you know, police, fire, essential personnel, and the ability to make sure that we've got, you know, flow of funds and that sort of thing, to have that alternative. I mean, that was part of the discussion that we were talking about early on, right? That we've got, you know, alternative payment systems if they were ever needed. So, but then I think, Gary, to the point would be if the state were doing this, then for others to be able to, you know, opt in if they wanted to. I mean, it's just an alternate payment system.
Just as a citizen, just as a regular citizen, I wouldn't support that at all, I don't think. I mean, I think the idea that the state is forward thinking and doing this and providing for the non-capital, for the capital gains treatment. No, for
And that's the next big part. that we're
right,
gonna
for
talk
the
about.
non-taxable treatment of a transaction, I guess is
Yeah.
maybe the right way to say it. That's what I think would be great, but it would seem odd to me that the state would get into the business of being a gold-backed transaction processor.
Yeah,
That'd be
no,
hard
and
to argue.
no, I think I agree with that, but I think kind of to your point on the framework. I mean, I think that's what this is getting at, that as a provider in the state where the state would use and others may use. That it would be vaulted in the state and insured and audited and all of those things to be able to go. Right now, there's nothing, right? Right now, there's very little that, and I think what Jason has talked about, well, I shouldn't say there's nothing, right? But at a state level, it's not a financial institution. And so, you know, with this, it would be putting some guardrails around.
If
What
we're
a system.
providing it to citizens.
Yeah, but I don't know that I don't know that it, I mean, kind of going back to,
Using it
I
for
don't know that we
free.
go there and going back to the liability system.
Right.
I don't know that we go to the point of taking ownership, right? I don't know that I'm comfortable with that.
Right, so
But-
this is an RFP for what's the system that would allow a citizen that had gold to make certain payments to the state? You know, that were backed by gold and then that, but to the extent that that was a thing, that you know, that the state established that relationship, you know, that would increase the attractiveness of that platform, that gold payments platform for other transactions within the state and elsewhere, but it wouldn't actually be sponsored by the state for purposes other than just receiving state payments. Is that
I think,
it's kind of what I
I-
thought it was.
I think you're hitting that, Randy, because then that gets to the next point of payment of taxes, you know, severance taxes, bonding, and that sort of thing, where, you know, we've got a very robust precious metals industry, mining industry, that could then have a easy way of facilitating payments, whether in kind or whether through a platform.
Okay, so here's my understanding, because I'm understanding this differently. If you have a transactional platform, as a citizen of the state, I could go in and take my dollars out of my bank account, convert them to gold, and have that value held on a debit card, essentially, that then I could transact at any business that takes debit card. That's way beyond just taxes, taking taxes. We're talking about the facilitation of transactions within the economy using the MasterCard rails or whatever rails are out there. And having the state facilitating that.
Well, we're not
right?
necessarily like.
Well,
we're facilitating.
We're essentially saying that the state
Isn't the word authorizing? I mean, if you go back to the
Yeah.
constitutional language as well, really what I think is needed is the state to authorize the ability for citizens to be able to use gold as in transactions, so that it doesn't get taxed for capital gains.
In payment,
Mhm.
you know, but I would say
Or
it's
a
not
state sanctioned-
facilitate.
a state sanctioned platform or.
That's
Yeah.
more like it,
Right.
right?
Yes.
That's more like it. Right? That it's a state sanctioned alternative payment platform.
And that platform has to have all the regulatory bells and whistles and all of the, right, all of the financial regulations
Well, it
embedded
would
in
need
it.
it if it's gonna tie into the financial system, which it would necessarily
has to,
need to do,
yeah.
so it would.
It has to come with all
So by nature, it would have to have all of
Right.
those same protect, that's
Right.
kind of what Jason was
that. Exactly.
laying out earlier, it already has to have that.
Right,
So.
right. But
Yeah,
yeah,
you want to be able to protect the right for people to be able to use gold as money. I mean, that's going back to what Randall was saying, the libertarian angle is you've got to protect that right, and you've got to make sure that people don't get taxed just for keeping their purchasing power, which is generally what comes in around capital gains. So the way to do that under the Constitution without falling into the traps that one of your colleagues that sat behind you said around making sure that the city, the state isn't guilty of, you know, coining something, is to do it along the lines of what Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 says, which is that yes, no state may make anything a currency except authorizing gold and silver in payments. And I think you maybe got to speak to your team and just make sure you get the language right around what that authorization means.
yeah, and then that gets to Gary's point, that potentially then this could set up where, for example, the state makes a payment to Rio Tinto for various services that it provides. Rio Tinto has a capital gain that it pays under protest, and the state and Rio Tinto could then go in and say the IRS did these regulations. It's not a bill. It's not US code. This is IRS reg, and then potentially challenge that. So, but But in the initial stage, it's simply having an alternate payment system that has been authorized by the state, that the state or anyone else could opt into.
But that seems also just, it's a little bit of a tangential point to the central point we're talking about now, but as part of the study as to what's the reason for doing this, you know, Utah has a big mining industry. I mean, that's another reason for Utah to say we're going to facilitate the use of gold in the payment system in Utah. You know, people ought to have choice. We've got a big mining industry. All of these are reasons for Utah to be a place to do this.
Exactly, fintech leader, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Taking a step back, then we want to have both like a study committee or conducted at the same time as the RFPs submitted. To kind of study these specific issues, and maybe it is the same committee to make the determination on whether or not to approve the RFP.
You're talking about item 7, the study.
Yes.
I mean, that's not necessarily my thought on it. I mean, I think the, you know, the payment system, but then studying the potential uses of it for the state was my thought.
As part of the RFP process, or just learning about the capabilities of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think capabilities and
gonna hold up
ongoing,
your
right? Because
RFP
kind of going to
process.
Randy's point, right? That the study committee then could comprise, you know, the idea of how you would approach setting up a capital gain challenge. And then how, kind of like the same language we had in 348 to continue to deal with, you know, the type of fintech implications for the state. You know, that'd be my thought.
So maybe I could, I think what you're getting at is something that was confusing to me a little earlier on, and I think that the study has a lot of those elements into it. And what you're really talking about is what the state's going to identify as an acceptable mechanism for allowing this transaction to be taken place. What you really don't want is a whole bunch of people walking into a shop on the corner with a pile of coins or bars saying, "Hey, I want to buy something." You want to endorse, so to speak, an acceptable mechanism for monetizing the gold. And I think that that would be a good element to be included in the study. So when you talk about payments for vendors and goods and services, I mean, that's the heart of what it's all about right there. Is how does this happen without you telling somebody that they can do this and they have to go figure out how to get coins out of the vault and then go in and try and make a payment somewhere else. I think it's really about the application and what you're effectively endorsing as a platform.
I don't know if I fully grasp what you were saying, but I think by setting out the criteria for the RFP, then any of the responses that come back to the RFP that either meet or don't meet the criteria, then that kind of takes care of that by itself, does it not? So by putting out RFP criteria, if nothing comes back that acceptably meets that, then you don't move forward. If it does, then you move forward, right?
It sort of is an interesting question and that is raised. So what happens if I decide to go out and buy some gold coin and I have them sitting in my vault and I go out and use them somehow? Am I covered by the same kind of tax protections that I would get if I was on a transaction system? And I just hadn't thought about that until.
Well, I think you would be wanting to not necessarily have that be the mechanism with which people operate, because then you start getting into a whole other kind of challenges, a whole other world of challenges around heritage of gold and quality of gold. I think what you want is limitations on acceptable mechanisms where trust and transparency can be maintained, for example, as Jason can do through the platform Glint. So I think I mean, it's almost to the question, like the RFP, it's a question of really being crystal clear as to what that RFP is saying and how it's actually going to be implemented into that study. I mean, I'm still wrestling with what the study's going to do, if the RFP is going to address a lot of those challenges or a lot of those questions. But I mean, you really need to be clear on what you're endorsing as a mechanism so that you can all trust and trace this goal and not make it very cumbersome or challenging for people to get it implemented.
Yeah, so help me understand what might be missing. So the idea is looking at first of all, an alternative payment system for whatever contingency and purely for choice, right? Purely for choice for the liberty interest that we talked about, which is, largely the fundamental reason that we've been talking about. So a gold-backed electronic payment system, because Utah's a precious metal state, because, we're seeing various things happening with gold and that sort of thing. So a gold-backed electronic payment system whereby meets all of the, state financial regulations. I think that's already in there somewhere. But is vaulted in Utah, can be redeemed and has parameters for redemption, either into Federal Reserve notes or physical gold or silver, where the technology, code, implementation parameters are held in escrow. So if anything were to happen to whatever that system is, that would be in escrow, so that system could continue forward. That has support criteria spelled out in the RFP. And so if there's something that can meet that, then separately would be continuing to study where that system may be necessary, maybe where it's more beneficial than current payment systems, where the capital gain tax treatment through that system, or virtually any payments in gold and silver, it wouldn't be limited to that system, but continuing to study the types of things that we're doing here, but just carry that into the future, and then give the treasurer rulemaking authority to spell out in more detail any of the bigger criteria. And then, like we were talking about with Gary, that if there are any of those bigger criteria that we want to make sure we catch up front, we do that now. What else would we be missing?
One thing that would address the issue we've just been talking about is if we said a gold-backed dollar denominated transaction system, because that's the reality of what we're doing, right? That gets you away from trying to transact in gold coins, right? It's a dollar denominated, gold backed but dollar denominated.
Jason, maybe you have a view on this, but wouldn't it be a payment system which enables the use of gold in addition to other mechanisms for payment?
I think a couple of comments really. One is I think you just got to make it clear as well that the use of this with people is not compulsory, and I think that deals with the issue about people wanting to come in and redeem their gold coins and things at supermarkets because they're just not they just won't be accepted. And so you let the market deal with that, and you make sure it's not compulsory. And when it comes down to the actual platform or platforms that you'll be considering, I think it needs to be it just needs to be said that it's a gold payment system, because of course people can denominate that or value that whichever way they want. And it might be that people will do gold peer-to-peer payments and sending gold and gifting gold and sending gold in lieu of payments of services and goods, as well as using, for instance, a debit card, which obviously is used for when merchants are charging in dollars, and therefore things like the technologies that people are using, such as the app, will make it very clear what the dollar denomination is of a transaction. I don't think you need to go into that much detail, really. I mean, obviously the RFPs, when they come back, people will be telling you how they're dealing with things, and you'll be evaluating the usability for that. Yeah, I think one of them you might want to talk about it. Sorry.
Yeah, you guys, this what didn't get onto this list is the list we talked about with the drafting attorney on Monday. Solution requirements, gold vaulted in Utah, bullion, LBMA, international standard, directly allocated physical ownership of gold denominated in US dollars down to a penny. Alternate payment system, electronic payments, card-based electronic payments, real-time payments at point of transaction, exchange of gold to US dollars, peer-to-peer payments, real-time exchange, audit reporting oversight by the Treasurer's Office, parameters for redemption, physical gold and silver, provide for redemption in Federal Reserve notes or physical gold and silver, other physical precious metal embodiments. I guess that was just kind of a question. Technology software to be held in escrow for state access should provider fail to deliver. Technology and software on servers in state to protect against external threats, where state may have no jurisdiction. Operational management, ongoing operation, administration, compliance, monitoring, client support, disclosure of fees and costs, state cost recovery, in whatever the implementation of the system is, ongoing technical support, adherence, that's where it was, I couldn't find it here. Adherence to relevant state and federal financial regulations, and proposed language, Office of Treasurer shall issue a request for proposal to create a gold-based electronic payment system for the state. And then that was.
You might want to add to that list transaction cost limitations, so that.
Yeah, I mean, we had it in
State's gonna be
disclosure.
behind it, we need to make sure that it's a relatively efficient form of exchange for participants. We don't want to be standing up something that is gonna have high transaction
I think,
costs.
yeah, I think another thing about that, I mean, for instance, we're currently going through a reevaluation of our pricing, but there's regulatory requirements that mean that we have to be open, fair, and not misleading, and we have there are lots of regulations which various people around the table in financial services will be aware of. You know, our consumer duty regulations mean that we've got to do months of studies into whether or not, for instance, price changes and things are considered to be fair. And I think, again, this is where the state really can come into offering something real added value, apart from just authorizing it, also in terms of auditing it and making sure that, yes, the gold's there, but also, as you say, Kurt, whoever's being selected isn't doing the wrong thing for the consumer. But I just want to stress that regulation already exists at both federal and state level. You've got to be careful you're not end up trying to run the business or run the system. I'm guessing if you've got a toll road that needed to be built, you'd select someone to do that, and you'd trust that they would be doing it with the existing health and safety regulations that already exist within the state.
Right.
Yeah, and this goes on to what we were talking about with the drafting attorney on Monday. Then also selection criteria would look at its ability as a medium of exchange, secure, efficient, cost-effective, trustworthy means of transacting payments for goods and services, store of value, preserve purchasing power over time, unit of account, reliable standard for measuring value of goods and services, in consultation with the tax commission on tax implications, and then study forward some of the continuing things that we talked about. So yeah,
one of the other things that Ken, you might want to consider as well is,
I'm like, no, I know we talked about this.
one of the other things you might want to consider as well is that the system is open. In other words, there's something in there that means that the platform needs to be able to integrate with, for instance, other systems. So, for instance, the open banking initiatives allow for this to be integrated into, for instance, local banking apps and things like that.
Okay, so where it's alternate payment system, card-based electronic payment system.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it on the hoof, but
interoperability, is that a?
I mean, again, I mean, sometimes talking to other states, you know, sometimes you can put too much stuff in the bill. Obviously, innovation and creativity around technology and stuff has probably lead to what I'm talking about happening anyway. It's whether or not you think that you want to encourage it or even legislate for it to definitely happen. So what we're talking about here is that, you know, if you've got an authorized gold currency, authorized transactional gold platform, then, you know, really that should be able to be also used or integrated into, for instance, various banks apps as well. So you'd have the checking account, savings account, and then might have the authorized Utah gold currency or something like that, whatever it's called. And those other banks shouldn't be shut out from being able to have that access through their apps as well. And I think really what the big opportunity here is by doing something like this is that you're really facilitating and catalyzing, going back to what Randall was saying, you know, a gold-based ecosystem. As you know, you talked about the mining, etc., but actually you're facilitating and catalyzing a gold-based financial services ecosystem within the state. So I'm a big proponent for open standards and open integrations and things like that. But again, this is already kind of happening in the private sector, and I think if you were to authorize such a thing, it would happen anyway. So you just need to have a little think about whether or not it's something you say you want to encourage within the legislation, or something you need to legislate that it definitely happens. Also, you know, you want to be able to give people a chance to be able to stand this up and evolve it. So, you know, if you put all the things you want into something, you might end up having no solution at all. But obviously in time things can evolve, and the ultimate solution always, you know, can come into being.
So Brittany, I just sent to you the notes from the discussion we had with drafting attorney on Monday on this, that if you wanted to put those, but that was an attempt to take what was here as criteria and broaden that out a little bit. And so then maybe everyone can see that a little bit better than.
Give me a minute to share with the people on Zoom.
Yeah.
Representative Ivory, if I may, just to reset, because I think there was, you know, we're all trying to figure out, I'm still trying to figure out the state's role in it, because it's people in the open market can do it already, right? So is it a matter of just enabling that to happen with fewer barriers in the state of Utah? Like, why do we have to own it? I guess, why do we have to own it and run, you know, provide this platform, as opposed to just enabling it to happen in the market?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's two things on that, right? One is that if the state is to use it in whatever scenarios, we would want criteria for the state's use of it. We don't want the gold to be vaulted here. We want to make sure it's audited and insured and that sort of thing for the state to ever use it. And then the other is the one that Gary brought up, that then to be able to both protect people from probably federal intrusion, and also to look at the capital gain tax issue. Those are probably the two biggest reasons, right? Does that make sense?
Just a quick question for Jason. Jason, when you were talking about interoperability there a second ago, did you mean like a Zelle-like application that, you know, banks do today? So, you know, in this case, it might say Glint or whatever, and you could make, is that what you meant by that?
Yeah. So just imagine that you've got your Zions Bank app, and at the moment you open up and you see your checking account and you see your savings account. What I'm talking about is that the Zions Bank can integrate with a platform that we're talking about, and have the checking account, the savings account, and then also, you know, the state authorized gold currency account as well. And the level of integration then could be one of maybe a few different levels. The first and easiest one would be that it would just advertise that, hey, you know, you can, did you know you can open the state authorized gold currency wallet? The second level would be that actually your transactions if you've authorized your bank to be able to do this, your transactions that have been implemented using the Utah authorized gold currency are shown inside your banking app. So you've got one view, one convenient view of everything inside your banking app. And then the third level of integration is where you use the API that would have to be open and secure, obviously, to be able to not just be able to see your transactions inside your Zion's banking app, but also to be able to do transactions on the state authorized gold currency wallet as well. So those are the kind of three levels of integration that's possible. And obviously, the regional banks that are more progressive are going to want to adopt that. And the more I've been thinking about it, I think it is important that the state in the legislation says that this is what it wants. It just might want to put some timeframes in place to allow that to breathe and allow that to happen, rather than say it has to be all in place for day one.
Jason Gardner.
You know,
We're not hearing you, Jason.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. So just a quick question for Representative Irie. He mentioned that having a state-based system, or at least a state-sanctioned system, would be a way of potentially protecting against the capital gain. And I'm having a hard time understanding where that connection comes in, because the way the IRS views the transacting in gold is any transaction, regardless of whether it's in gold or anything else, where you're getting a good or a service for that thing that you're using to transact, is a taxable event. And so I'm not understanding how the state sanctioning it will help.
There were two thoughts there, right? One is just protecting the payment system in general.
Okay.
The ability to transact with an electronic gold payment system.
Okay.
And that's the protect aspect of protecting citizens. The second aspect is the state interest, perhaps with a vendor, to then assert and move forward the case to challenge the capital gains taxation of gold as a payment system. So two different ideas there. Does that make sense?
So it would be on the foundation of the Article 1, Section 10 provision of the Constitution, that challenging it on the one thing in that provision that makes me a little bit, that's going to be a difficult challenge is the fact that it says anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payments of debts. And by the very fact that we're using something like a Glantap does not gold or silver coin specifically. And that's the
Could
part
I address that, Jason?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, well, yeah, Kevin's still there. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, Bronson versus Rhodes, I'd point you to that, in which there was a point at which in the United States that there were no US coins available. We had used Spanish coins, and we had the Coinage Act that prohibited the use of foreign coins, and people were supposed to turn them in to the US Mint, and they were going to recast them. People were, obviously concerned that the government was going to shave their coins in some way and not give them back the exact metal amount. So this went all the way to Bronson versus Rhodes, which basically said that a coin under the Constitution and this definition, and according to the court, which has never been challenged, is nothing more than a government stamp as to weight and purity of the metal. And therefore, according to Bronson Rhodes, which I think was a unanimous decision, but I'd have to look. I'm at the airport, so I can't look. They said, for now, for the past, forevermore, bullion is the equivalent of coins under the Constitution and as deemed by the U.S. government. And it's never, it's a really well done, because Bronson had loaned money to Rhodes, and Rhodes said, I can't pay you back, so I'll pay you back in greenbacks. And he wanted coins back instead. So the court split the baby basically and said, he can pay you back in bullion because it is the moral equivalent, constitutional equivalent, legal equivalent of coins. And that is held up multiple times. So I think that is the answer. And I think the basis for it as Article 1, Section 10, if you look at the IRS code, they're taxing it, and they actually carve out this whole notion of functional currency. They say Bitcoin doesn't qualify currency, it's technically not legal tender. And this is their rulings on Bitcoin. And then they say gold is not functional as a currency, but it is absolutely can be made legal tender. Well, in this case, you put the two nickels together and you have a dime. You have gold that is functional as currency and legal tender. And when you apply the Bronson versus Rhodes, I really do think you have a strong case. We've talked to the attorney generals about this. They believe that. We're working on legal opinions regarding that. But I think the state has a very strong case. They have the income tax has perfect right to tax collectibles, and that's how it deems gold and silver today. And they function as collectibles. But in this case, if they function as currency, I believe that the federal government will acknowledge a state's rights in that respect. When you put Lane County, Oregon, and some other Supreme Court cases, I think there's a very strong case to be made. And if you read the strict rulings from the IRS, their strict writings, it meets that definition: functional and legal tender. So I think there's a good case to be made here.
So you're saying that the key is to have the state treating it as a legal tender first, and that's the trigger that allows for the challenge to the IRS treatment of it.
If they make it functional
instead of a collection.
Yeah, that seems to be the idea, Jason, and that's where we had that professor that had written the multi-volume treatise on gold that was here, last meeting or the meeting before that. And so, which is also why we need a continued study in this, because there's a lot of moving pieces that would go to that to get to the challenge of cap. Step one is the payment system. We protect states from, it's got the Article 1, Section 10 sanction of the state as a payment system. And then down the road, if a vendor or someone were, paid their cap gain tax under protest, then there's the potential to stay with that vendor or payee to be able to then go challenge the IRS interpretation that's not in code, right? It's just reg. So
okay. So but you're feeling that the state's basically sanctioning is the key there, not because of course someone could challenge the paying of capital gains on gold right now. But the key missing link is that state sanction element is what you're
that's what we heard.
It has to be legal tender according to the IRS writings. I mean, you can still challenge it, of course, but according to what the IRS, they said that's why Bitcoin, which is a functional payment system, cannot qualify because it is not legal tender, and it can't be made legal tender by a state. The federal government could, of course, but they can do whatever they want. They can coin money. The states can't.
Yeah.
And the key part there is in Utah back in 2011 is when we did do the gold and silver legal tender in Utah already. So that's already been in code for, 13, 14 years. We've already kind of seasoned that. So.
Except wasn't that just gold and silver specie, Ken? I think that's what's the importance with this is it needs to be bullion.
And then that's what we had in the initial draft of the bill last year. So we probably need to include that in this as well. Yeah. And I've got to go get some stuff filed with the court on a case that I'm just. Can I suggest this? And I'm so sorry. We talked about these various criteria with Scott on Monday and we got the wrong draft. Can we send this draft out to everyone? And then maybe have a Zoom meeting on Monday or something with that? And then if I could, I'd just give you a quick overview of the rationale for the other two, that whether the committee wants to do anything with them or not. There are other representatives and senators that are looking at these other bills that are kind of out there.
I want to go back because I know we're out of time. But I know that one of the products that you wanted coming out today was the report that's going to go to the interim committee. And I just want to go back to something that Randy said on what the reason for the state to do this. I do think the language in the report, it could be, I think being deemed misleading if we're keeping a lot of the language as it is instead of just enabling it to be about choice rather than about.
We'll update the language.
Yeah, I think that's really well taken. And then what Marlo said early on was let's get comments back in.
Okay.
And let's get comments back into this. And
that would be great if we have an opportunity to comment.
Yeah.
And then let's you and I chat on the other thing.
Okay.
And then I would suggest, if I mean, just quickly on 3 and 4. 3 is simple, payment of taxes, performance bond, surety bond, potentially in gold. Brian, you have something to add on that?
Yeah, just on this one, something that we had talked about when you and I met and Scott and a couple weeks ago. I think on this, the only thing that I would suggest is making sure that, you know, because our companies, if they're going to pay gold, they might want to use an electronic system, but some of them are going to want to actually use physical gold.
Yeah, that's
they
right.
actually produce it. So I think that needs to be included in this. And then also we had talked about your idea of, you know, providing some kind of essentially an economic development incentive where they could get some kind of a discount on, you know, their severance tax or whatever other tax bill if they were going to bring physical gold to the treasurer's office, just to.
They are not bringing it to the treasurer's office.
And then that goes.
They're bringing it to my house.
Yeah, Bob Menendez, right? But see, point about potential of starting to develop an income
Yeah.
in a different stream.
Yeah, so I would just, you know, include both of those in the, you know, in the bill 3 periods.
Yeah, I think that's, and I think that's the intention.
The other thing to consider on that as well is that, you know, when you're dealing with things like that is to think about the role that the payments platform could have in that, because obviously trying to assay gold bullion that's coming into the system is something that needs to be seriously considered, because there is obviously a chain of integrity and providence that exists within the existing LBMA system, the London Bullion Market Association system, which is the international standard for bullion. And you know, there'd be some very simple ways to be able to have that bullion kind of imported into the system and then credited to the state's account, without the state having to get involved in going through that process. So it's something to consider and talk to the stakeholders about.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just put down standards for assaying or type of receipt. I put that there. And then we need to follow up, Brian, with Scott on that as well. And then kind of that and Division of Oil, Gas and Mining. But yeah, that basic idea is, you know, performance bonds, surety bonds, severance tax, income tax, the ability to pay in precious metals, whether electronic or bullion in kind. And then bill number 4 was an idea that kind of came out of, I sat on the Rev Tax Committee for a long time, and we had people coming back every year asking for an increase in their percentage tax. Like, we got a percentage tax, right? It should, by definition, keep pace. And like, it doesn't keep pace. And so books and asphalt and desks and whatever, we're not keeping pace because inflation is outpacing the percentage tax. And so the idea with 4, and we're looking at other members of the Senate and House that may take different parts of this, but right now our purchasing department is really unique in the United States in that it's funded not from general fund, it's funded by a vendor surcharge. So when the state needs tables or computers or whatever, we put out a request. A supplier says, okay, we'll give you 1,000 computers at $500 each. And then they pay a 0.5% surcharge to the purchasing department. That funds the purchasing department. And the idea was typical purchasing cooperatives charge a fee of between 2 to 5% as a purchasing cooperative. Could we then take, instead of the 0.5%, we do a 1% or a 2% or pick a number as a vendor surcharge as inflation insurance? Because we know we're going to buy desks forever, computers forever, asphalt forever. And then it becomes a long-term hedge on the rising costs of goods and things that the state purchases. So that's the basic idea with number 4.
Okay, great. And just a reminder, comments back tomorrow end of day on the report. So
We'll incorporate the feedback that we received today into the.
I think the language in the study needs to reflect the opinions of all the committee members in terms of kind of the state of the US dollar and stuff. So we'll put effort into that. So
yeah, we'll update that. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
okay.